Hey everybody, welcome back to Learning the Fundamentals. My name is Shepard Merritt. This is an SFR Plus podcast about my journey through the Christian faith, and specifically we've been talking about my involvement in the independent fundamental Baptist movement. This episode is going to be a little bit different than my typical episode because I'm going to have less of an outline. I'm going to be talking about a more broad topic, and that is just how the independent fundamental Baptist movement affected my life. And I've tried my best to break this up into categories and organize it to the best of my ability, but there's so much to discuss about this topic that it's hard to break it down by category. So this episode may be a little bit less organized. I may circle around a little bit, but I just have so much that I want to say about this, because the IFB has affected my life and shaped my life in many ways, for good and for bad. I think most of what I'm going to talk about in this episode is positive. I've just experienced so many things and learned so many things, and so much of my life has been changed, and the trajectory of my life has been affected a lot by the movement. And so I want to talk about that. And so there's a lot of different avenues, a lot of different aspects of that. But like I said, I've tried my best to break it down into categories. And I guess the first category, the first thing that I think about when discussing how the IFB affected my life is that it just kickstarted me to take my faith seriously. Now, I think I was saved. I know that I was saved before I got involved in the IFB, or before I even really knew what it was. I was saved long before that, but I didn't know my Bible very well. I was very unfamiliar with any sort of doctrine or theology. All I knew essentially was that I was saved, and that when I died I was going to go to heaven. And even that I was kind of questionable sometimes. I was unsure of my salvation a lot, and I think that's mainly due to the fact that I was not completely certain on the doctrine of eternal security. Didn't really know what that meant. Hadn't really heard that taught very thoroughly. But I do believe that I was saved before I got involved in the IFB. It's just when I got involved, those sort of doctrines became clear, and it's almost like it just clicked, like, oh yeah, that is what I believe. I just know how to say it now. I just know how to say it better. But anyways, yeah, when I heard about the IFB, it just kickstarted my faith to where I took it seriously for the first time, and I started actually reading my Bible and understanding it for the first time. And I would say one word to describe me when I got involved in the movement is inquisitive. I mean, I was just asking questions about everything. I had some close friends that were kind of, I guess, leading me in the faith a little bit. Some friends that knew a little bit more than I did, a lot more than I did. And so I was constantly asking them questions. Well, why do you believe this? How do you get that from the Bible? You know, what do you have to say about this passage and this? And I just felt like I was learning a million new things a day, and my faith was just explosive. I just learned so much, it seemed like, and just became really passionate really quickly. And I think that was a good thing for the most part. I think that zeal was often misguided, and you know that when you're going 100 miles an hour, you're bound to have some speed wobbles along the way. And so I think I definitely ran into that. But as I began to grow in my faith, the questions that I was asking sort of eventually transitioned from, what do you believe about this, to what do people who disagree with you say about this, and how do you respond to that? And so when I started questioning that sort of thing is when the door really began to open to me, and my eyes really began to be open to more deep truths of Scripture. I wasn't so one-track minded of the new IFB teaches this, and now I believe this. So I think I grew a lot from that. But just the fact that the new IFB, or just the IFB in general, opened my eyes to more is a good thing. Whether it was good or bad, there's a lot of bad teachings from that movement that I learned, that I eventually learned to disagree with. But whether it was for good or for bad, the IFB exposed me to more. It opened my eyes to more of the Bible. And it makes me think of a verse in Philippians chapter 1, verse 18. It says, "What then, notwithstanding, every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and I therein do rejoice, yea, and will rejoice." So, whether what I was hearing from the new IFB about their interpretation of the scriptures or the traditions that they held, whether that was good or bad, regardless, I was exposed to more of the scriptures, and that was ultimately beneficial for me. And another way that the IFB affected my life through that is it encouraged me to be a leader. I've never really been super comfortable in a leadership position. I am the youngest brother of 3, and so my life is I live my life kind of through the lens of being the little brother. I constantly feel like I'm the little brother everywhere I go, and I guess that reputation has sort of stuck with me my whole life. But when I began to listen to new IFB preaching, I was preached to and spoken to in a way that expected me to be a leader. And I had never thought that way before, but it gave me a strong desire to want to be a leader, specifically of my home. Now, I will put a disclaimer out there, and this is a common theme with a lot of these teachings. I don't necessarily believe in the example set forth by the IFB about what they think it means to be a leader, but their movement did expose me to what the Bible says about being a leader. And so through the IFB, I learned the biblical roles of a family, of a husband and a wife. And so being exposed to that, I developed a passion to want to be the husband and the father that God expects me to be. And like I said, this is the case for a lot of things with the movement. I disagree with the example set forth by them, but I agree with kind of the general belief that they hold. Or obviously I believe in what the Bible says about the issue, but often I think they take it too far or elevate it to a level that's unhealthy. But getting into the IFB, it just kick-started me to take my faith seriously, encouraged me to grow and to read more and to take the scriptures seriously, and it just instilled a drive and a desire to be a leader, which I had never really had before. And that kind of moves me on to my next point, is that I got married and had children young. I started a family at I would consider a young age, and that kind of is correlated to the fact that I had a desire to be a leader. I had a desire to be a husband and a father. And the IFB does encourage getting married and starting a family at a young age. I think that's a good thing that they teach, and I'm so glad that I did. A lot of people, will tell people my age, enjoy your youth, don't get married and don't have kids till you've really experienced everything you want to experience. Travel as much as you can before you have kids, because then you just lock yourself down. But I'm so glad that I started a family young, because I feel like this is just the beginning of the adventure. I feel like having children has taught me more about life than anything. It's just been super fun and helpful. It has been humbling. It has made me become a better man, I believe. And just the joy that comes from a family and children and being married is something that you don't want to postpone. I'm very glad that the IFB encouraged me to get married and have children so young. And I think this is a good time to talk about why this movement impacted my life so crucially. Because as I was going through this movement, I was also going through a lot of personal changes. As we were being introduced to these new pastors and a new church and new teachings and new doctrines, and as we were kind of solidifying these positions, I wasn't married at the time. My wife and I, when we first heard about all of these things, we were still dating. And we heard about the IFB and all these teachings, and we started taking it seriously. We started getting on board, and it caused a lot of tension between our families. And we were receiving backlash for the things that we believed from both sides of the family. Our friends, people that were close to us, were sort of questioning us, advising us against this sort of thing. And as we were going through that sort of struggle, we were also going through some really big personal changes. My wife was moving out from her parents' house and moving into an apartment, changing jobs. She was working 2 jobs at the time, and we were getting engaged and getting married, and I was starting a new job, and then we were learning how to be husband and wife and learning how to be parents and going through financial struggles along the way. And so all of these life changes were going on during the time that we were trying to figure out what we believe. And me specifically, with the weight of being a leader of my home, I had a burden on me to lead my family in the right direction. But I was so confused because people that I respected were telling me that I was wrong, and people that were close to me were telling me that this movement is not where I should be going. But then on the other hand, I was really passionate just about the scriptures, and I wholeheartedly believed that I was in the right place. I was in the right church, and I was leading my family in the right direction. I say I wholeheartedly believed that. I had that desire. I was just wanting the truth. I mean, we were just seeking the truth. And as a husband and a father, I had a big burden on me to not make the mistake of misleading my family. But as we were going through all of these things, I will say that it just brought my wife and I closer together, because whenever we received backlash from other people, or I say backlash, I mean, it was just really like loving criticism. I mean, we didn't make any enemies per se. I mean, our family loved and supported us, but they did tell us what they had against the movement. And it did lead to some really difficult conversations and awkward tension, and it definitely affected relationships. Not beyond restoration, but it did affect relationships with our families. And so, but as we were going through all of that, one thing remained was that we were together. We were going through it together. And a lot of times it just felt like that's all we had. A lot of times it felt like it was just us against the world. As cliche as that sounds, it did feel like that sometimes. And it kind of forced us to stick together and grow closer together and closer to the Lord, because a lot of times it just felt like that's all we had. But I don't really know how to articulate everything that was going on, and that's why I said this episode may be a little bit all over the place, because it's kind of hard to capture those 4 or so years worth of seeking the truth. But essentially, like I said, we went through job changes, moving out, financial instability, getting married, having children, disagreements with family, going to a church that our whole family kind of disagrees with. And a lot of times, we stuck our neck out for that church that we went to. We did go to an IFB church for a while, and I won't give too many details about that whole ordeal and that situation on the podcast, because I don't necessarily want that information to be public. But I think that it's important to our story that we did go to an IFB church that we loved for about 3 years after we were married. And despite criticism from our family, we did stick our neck out in defense of that church and constantly invited our family to come check it out. We were just saying things like, we love this church, it preaches the truth. It's really good. We would love for y'all to come visit. And we were in defense a lot of times of the church that we went to because of the expectation that we had because of the things that we believed. People just made assumptions about the church that we went to. And so it was a long time that we spent just trying to defend our church to our family. And then one of the hardest things that we had to go through after speaking so fondly of that church, as I just began to seek more truth about the things that I believed, as I began to examine myself, and I began to have some disagreements with King James onlyism, and that eventually led to us being asked to leave that church and having to break that to my family, that the church that we had spoken so fondly of had actually asked us to leave because of the thing that we were so passionate about this whole time. The thing that caused so much division, King James onlyism, the thing that caused so much division in our family. We were actually kicked out of church because we disagree with that. And so that's a humbling experience. And then it just feels like, oh man, we've lost all credibility because we've been promoting a certain lifestyle and a certain set of beliefs, and then now we've changed our mind, and so we just felt like our reputation and our credibility was ruined. And so going through that together it's just a humbling experience, having to say, you know what, like, we were wrong about this. But not only were we wrong about that belief, the church that we spoke so fondly of has actually asked us to leave because we've expressed disagreement with them on that issue. And that's just a tough situation to be in, especially just as the leader of my home. I was constantly questioning myself, thinking like, if I change my mind about this issue, it's going to discredit my ability to lead. It's going to seem as if I don't have any sort of clue what's best for my family. And I'm just so thankful for my wife. I mean, she has been right by my side through this whole process of figuring things out and learning the fundamentals of the faith. And she's just constantly been right by my side and been very faithful, following me in my attempt to lead us to the truth. And she asks me questions, and plays devil's advocate a lot and questions what we believe, and in a very loving way. And it just encourages me to just be in the scriptures and always be ready to have an answer for everything. And I love that. She asked me so many questions, but she's been right by my side along the way. And I'm really grateful for that. And the things that the worries that I had, that she would not have any faith in me as a husband anymore because I was wrong about certain things, I had no reason to worry about those sort of things because she's just been right by my side, faithfully following my lead the whole time. And I just am so grateful for that. But all of those difficulties that we went through just brought us closer together, even through having to humble ourselves and admit that we were wrong, and then face our family with that and say, y'all were kind of right about some of these things. It was a humbling experience, but it just brought us so much closer together. And so that's one of the biggest ways that the IFB affected my life, not necessarily because of what they did or what they taught, but because of my involvement just in that movement. Just that movement itself shaped my life in so many ways. Just the fact that I am where I am with a wife and 2 children. I mean, my brothers both have children in similar ages to my children, and they're all growing up together, and it's just this amazing time of life that I don't think that I would have if I never got involved with the IFB. And so I'm so grateful for my involvement in that movement. As many difficulties that came with it, there's just so many blessings that resulted from it. And I can just see God's hand in that, just directing us through that, taking us through that process just to teach us what we needed to learn. It taught me so much about myself, so much about how to be a better man, a better father, a better husband, a better servant of God. I wasn't taught by the new IFB, but I was taught through my experience, was just how to disagree with somebody, how to have discussions about things you disagree with, and how to reverence the truth. Those are qualities that I think are somewhat lacking in the new IFB, but I think that's why we learned them. It taught me so much about how to spot false teachers, how to be careful about the things that you believe, not just be carried about with every wind of doctrine. It taught me so much about the Bible, but also just how to think, how to listen, how to evaluate yourself and see whether you're on the right path. It just taught me so much about life in general. I made so many good friends through the movement. It strengthened the relationships that initially were damaged through my involvement in the IFB. I still kind of, have my roots a little bit in the IFB. I mean, even the church that I go to now, it uses the King James, and it has some roots in the IFB, and I'm grateful for that, because I believe that it gets everything right that the IFB teaches right. But then it also is a very balanced church, and my brothers even go there and their families, and it could not have ended up better than it did, in my opinion. Everything that was damaged throughout my involvement in the movement is restored tenfold now. Just the relationships that had a lot of tension because of the disagreements that we had are now stronger than ever because of those conversations that we had. And I know that this is a little less organized than it typically is. I'm sort of all over the place with my thoughts, but to kind of bring it all back on track, getting involved with the IFB affected my life dramatically in many different ways. It kick-started me to take my faith seriously. It caused me to ask questions and learn more about the Bible, and whether or not the opinions of the IFB were good or bad. It was exposing me to the Bible, and that was a good thing. So it just kick-started my faith, and it encouraged me to be a leader. It instilled a desire in me to be a good father and a good husband and a leader and start a family young, which I'm very grateful for. It brought my wife and I closer through a lot of tribulation, a lot of hardships with our families, a lot of damaged relationships that became restored later on, a lot of just hardships about life in general, going through moving houses, changing jobs, getting married, having children, financial instability, all sorts of physical, practical challenges as we were trying to battle this spiritual challenge of just seeking the truth. Where does God want us? What does God want us to believe? Where does God want us to go to church? What is the truth? And it just brought my wife and I closer, and it taught us so much about life, strengthened our marriage, it strengthened our faith. It just impacted our trajectory and where our life was going to go just dramatically. If I had never gotten involved in the IFB, I don't know that I would be where I am in my faith right now. I don't know that I would have 2 children growing up alongside their 4 cousins. My family is just so close now, and everything just seems to be going so well. And I'm just so grateful that God brought us through the movement and taught us everything that he did through that process. And so my goal with this podcast is to kind of elaborate on that story a little bit and tell that story in hopes that somebody out there maybe can relate to that or pick up on something. I'm not trying to bash the movement. I've made that clear. I'm not trying to condemn anybody who's still in the movement. I feel like I've made that clear. I'm very grateful for my involvement and everything that I learned from the IFB. I'm thankful to God for bringing me through that. And so my hope with this episode, my goal was kind of just to discuss things in a broad sense of just how my life was impacted and affected by my experience in the movement. And I think overall it's definitely for the better. And so I'm grateful for the IFB. I'm grateful for everything that I learned from that movement. And this podcast is just to kind of document that. And I know that this is only the beginning of my journey in the faith, but I feel like I've learned a lot through that experience, just about the Bible and about life in general. And so this kind of marks a significant chapter in learning the fundamentals. And so thank you for taking the time to listen to that and to listen to me ramble about all of that. But this is something that is extremely important to me, something I'm really passionate about, and something that I don't think that I can completely articulate. And I feel like I can't really get across everything that happened. There's so many elements to this whole situation that it's just hard to capture that in a podcast episode. But I hope I've achieved my goal of condensing it into a nutshell and giving you the big picture of how the IFB affected my life. So thank you so much for listening. I hope this episode has been edifying. I will see you in the next one.